All right. So, hello, everybody. My name is Teresa Barber. I am a psychology professor, but also I'm in the neuroscience department. It is kind of weird to be in both fields. Folks really are not sure how to define me, but I am a behavioral neuroscientist. I am a person who studies memory. For me, I have always been fascinated by how we make memories. And I can lecture for hours about the biochemistry of memory, the phosphorylation of proteins, the changes in synaptic potentials, a variety of things going on in the acetylcholine and glutamate and so forth. But I'm pretty sure that's not why you're listening. What you're listening for is most likely because you're interested in a couple of different things. Primarily, you're interested in how to improve your memory, and you're interested probably in worries about problems with memory. So, I want to say first, if you're worried about having memory problems, it is most likely not the case that you have Alzheimer's disease. 95% of folks who have memory problems have those memory problems because of stress, lack of sleep, some type of issue with nutrition or some form of psychopathy like depression and so forth, primarily no sleep and stress. Trust me. So it is the case that we do have to also remember that our memories are a very active process, and you need to spend time doing that process. It doesn't come instantly without work. I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you all the work you have to do. It's an important thing. One of the important things is to keep in mind that memories do change as we age. They change in a variety of ways. So, if we think about change that happens, we think about a couple of different things. One thing that changes is your ability to focus. You know, young people, very young people, they're on their smartphones, they've got headphones, they've got a conversation going, they're watching TV, they're playing a game, they're doing this, they're doing that. What? It does work for them. For older folks like me, one thing at a time. That is how our focus changes. As long as we maintain that focus, our memories tend to be fine. The other thing that happens is the amount of energy you have to spend in terms of remembering something. Things seem to come so easy to very young people. However, if you spend the time and you spend the energy, memories typically are fine, even in very old age. The other thing that happens is that you do need to spend the energy and the kind of manipulations that you might be having issues on in terms of studying your memory to make that memory focus better than it was. Okay? So these changes are normal. That does not mean you have any type of disorder. However, if you have other things going on that might indicate a memory impairment, go see the doctor. The doctor is the one who can actually do a test for a dementia of some type and can then work on that dementia with you. I want to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease. It is the most common dementia that's out there, it is a non-curable progressive disease. That means the problem that starts is one of typically memory problems. Why? Because what happens in the brain is actually the destruction of neurons, typically starting with the destruction of neurons that are involved in memory. That's why memory is the first kind of symptom that you see. As the disease progresses, memory impairments become more of a problem. The person loses their place in time. They lose their ability to remember things from day to day. They also ultimately, as the brain kind of separates from each space and so forth, it actually then starts to create issues with calculation, so balancing those checkbooks, not that I can do it, it becomes a problem. And ultimately, there are what we consider higher order symptoms, such as delusions, hallucinations, and so forth. The best thing is that early on, we actually can treat Alzheimer's. We have drugs that work on those memory systems. They help that chemical system act better in terms of the little number of neurons that are left actually can function better. It is, however, progressive, and ultimately the drugs don't work. Let's talk first, though, about non-dementia memory problems. I think that may be something that people are more interested in talking about. Memory, if you think about it, is a very big process. It is not just one little teeny tiny aspect of behavior. It actually includes many different things. If you think about it, memory includes, at the minimum, 3 important features. The first feature is one called registration. That means you actually have to pay attention to the information. In my class, I always give the students an activity to demonstrate this problem. I ask them to draw a US penny. Can you do it? 8 features. The average person gets 2 features. They get Lincoln and they get the Lincoln, what is that? Is monument on the back. That's it. There are many, many features. What I point out is that we have all seen a penny. A lot. That means that penny has been in our view, but you haven't registered it. How can you remember it if you don't first attend to it? The second activity is actually retention. That's taking that first information and putting it into storage. That requires a lot of biochemical process, but it also requires manipulating the information. When you hear something, write it down. When you read something, actually imagine different aspects about it, manipulate the information. That will help it get into long-term memory. The last kind of component of memory, and actually the one that most of us have trouble with, is called retrieval, bringing the information back. You know the answer. It's right there. It's, I can't remember it. Tip of the tongue. The difficulty with retrieval is because there is so much going on that you have in terms of your memory store. Could you imagine going into the local grocery store and trying to find the little penny that's hidden on top of a shelf somewhere? It's going to be a little difficult. So retrieval is an important component of memory. It's something we do need to work on. So what are the tips for maintaining your memory? Well, the tips sound first very intuitive, but we do have to spend the energy to do them. There's no getting around it. There's no magical pill. There's no easy steps and so forth. First thing, be mentally active. You need to keep your brain active, involved in a lot of processes. So these processes become very rehearsed, very common for the brain to have. That means you'll have more activities and you'll be able to do these memory tasks more easy. What do I think of as remaining active? Everything from learning a foreign language, taking up a new hobby, doing something like a crossword puzzle every day, even bingo. It'll keep you busy, keeps the brain busy. The complementary part to that is keeping the body active. Why? Because this thing needs oxygen. It comes from blood. How do we get the blood there? We exercise. Yes, last year we just published a paper that showed that exercise improves memory. It does. You're going to have to do it. Even taking a walk will help. Riding a bike, doing anything. 20 minutes a day, you'll be fine. Keeps your brain active. What are the things that we also have to do? We need to keep our memory in basically good working order. No smoking, no alcohol, not no, but little, because the brain is a very, very active system. Anything that works on that to reduce activity is going to have an effect on memory as well. So it's important for us to do that. What's really important when we want to learn something, like learning someone's name, is to active participation in that. You've all been in meetings, you've all been in situations where somebody has introduced themselves. Did you even hear the name? Yeah, no. You have to pay attention to the name. And studies show that if you actually manipulate the name in some way, it actually will be easier to remember. So for example, one of the things that I do, because I have to learn a lot of students' names, is use those names in a very imaginative way. So for example, I had a student in my class the other semester whose last name was Gallagher. Who do we think of when we think of Gallagher? The guy who smashes watermelons. So I had this student's face smashing watermelons in my mind. I always will remember her last name is Gallagher. So it's important to actually make those associations and utilize those as a way of memorizing. I also suggest that you actually use all those technology aids. It's okay. You're allowed to write things down or use your fridge to remind you that you need butter and those kind of things. That's why we've invented technology. We have lots and lots of systems that will help us do it. Writing things down and saying things out loud is critically important. For example, one thing that I always have trouble with is closing my garage door when I leave in the morning. You do it every day. It's kind of hard to remember. Did you do it this morning? We've all driven back to check to make sure the garage is down. And then we've kind of driven by pretending we're just visiting our house and so forth. It's very hilarious. But we don't want to do it every day. Actually, putting the garage down, backing up, and saying, I have put the garage down. That will increase the memory for that day. It will save you the trip to going back to check everything. So I would really much encourage you to write things down. I would also encourage you to work on activities that help us remember the kinds of lists that we have to remember. List learning is incredibly difficult. That's why we have machines and notebooks and so forth that help us do that kind of memory. Most studies will agree that the best way to memorize a list of items is to create something that's called the memory palace. Pick a place that you know extremely well. Take each item on your list and place it in one specific spot on that imaginative place. Then, when you have to recall that list, all you have to do is go back to your magical place. For me, it's my office. I have one item stored near my plants, one item stored near my computer. It's in a circle around the room. I can actually memorize a list of items based on their places on the list in the magical room. And it's very, very effective. Bottom line is, it takes time. It takes energy. Memorizing or remembering faces actually takes a little bit more of activity. Faces are incredibly difficult to do. I am notorious for standing up the first day of every semester and explaining to students, I study memory because I have the worst memory for names of people according to their faces. I actually have an eidetic memory. All those books behind me, I can tell you what's on page 4 of each of them. Unfortunately, for each face, I can't do that very well. So I actually have to do special things to remember different faces. I have to use, again, imagery. So what I do is I try to require myself to think of a very unique feature of somebody's face. I then tie that feature to their name. Sometimes it doesn't work for me. Sometimes I have the worst time, especially as I'm first going through names, where I will tell a student, no, that's not your name. And they'll be like, yeah, it is. I go, no, I'm pretty much remembered your name as this. And they're like, that's my friend. I go, well, you guys look alike. It is a problem for me. So what I do is I create that imagery, tie it to the name. I will say the best thing that helps memorizing, remembering names is learn them, and repeat them. When you're introduced to somebody, they say, "Hi, my name is Liz." And you go, "Great, it's good to meet you, Liz." Liz, I had a friend when I was 4 who was really good. She lived next door to me, and you create this great story that Liz is involved in. You're talking with this person. You are making that imagery. Repeat the name. Don't make it weird. Don't just keep going, Liz, Liz, Liz. It'll kind of freak them out. But use the name a little bit often. And remember, when you meet the person again, you can say, I can't quite remember your name, but I'm thinking it's this. And people are very good about doing that. And as long as it's, not your boss, you'll probably be in good shape. But it is good to practice that name again. So memory is really an active process. It requires a lot of energy. It requires time. It requires devotion to those various processes. And it does change over time. And we do need to keep in mind that as it changes, that doesn't mean we have necessarily anything wrong with us. We just have to adjust the ways that we do things. Are we doing okay for time? Do we have some good questions to answer? We've got a question that says, I constantly forget restaurant names. Yeah, it is not an easy thing to do. There are actually names for the inability to name things. It's called anomia. And we actually sometimes talk around those, which is called circumlocution. So, for example, we might be sitting in our family room, we're watching a great flick on Netflix, and we turn to our spouse and we go, "Hey, could you go to that big square cold thing and get me something to drink?" And they look at you and they go, "Fridge?" And you go, "Yeah, sorry." That is the inability to remember a name. I would suggest that we write these down, we repeat these names, we actively use these names. Actually, at the end of the time that you spend in the restaurant, I would suggest you, as you walk out, go, "I really like this place called this name." So it stays with you. It's part of what you're doing. Let's see, do we have some more questions? Oh, we've got questions about stress and lack of sleep. Oh, yes. It is a difficult aspect. We're all faced with that. I tell my students that they should be sleeping 9 hours a day. They're adolescents, and in fact, their brains are changing majorly in the ways that connections are made. 9 hours. Yeah. An adult should be sleeping 8 hours a day. Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Because what happens when you sleep? One of the most important things that happens during sleep is that your brain makes new proteins. What does it do with those proteins? Turns out it makes connections between neurons, and it will actually improve memory to sleep after you form the memory. My students are always surprised that they didn't do very well when they stayed up all night. Yeah, you might remember a little bit in long-term memory, but it's gone. It's not going into any long store. It's a problem. What else? We got some more questions here. So we're asked a lot of questions about what the physiology of memory is. When you think about memories being formed, we're talking about cells communicating with each other that typically have just transient weak connections. Those weak connections, in order to be changed by experience, they have to be strengthened. Either the number of connections between cells have to grow, or the ways in which those cells are connected will change. That requires protein synthesis. It requires a change in the kind of conformity of the connections between cells and so forth. And it really is involving both glutamate systems, both acetylcholine systems, and a variety of systems that are kind of interacting to produce those changes. So it really does become an issue of how do we feed those cells appropriately, and how do we kind of increase that activity to kind of produce those great connections that we need. Let's see. Ginkgo biloba. Nah. My laboratory is amazing because I will often have students who come to me and ask, is it okay? Can we study, since you study memory, would it be okay to study a variety of different things? As a good scientist, I always say, let's actually study the effects of an herb or a treatment or something that's out there that people say improves memory. I am convinced I'll be proven wrong. Yeah, I've been proven right that ginkgo biloba sometimes does have an effect. The issue is dose and the amount of time that you take it. One of the most interesting things that I just found out and published about with some students was the effect of curcumin, which is that yellow herb that we find in many Southeast Asian foods. It turns out Alzheimer's disease is not very common in India and other Southeast Asian places. And we're now not surprised. Curcumin actually improves memory. And it is amazing, that reaction between variety of things that people kind of know about and the ways that it actually does change memory. We know that these herbs have changes in terms of the fluidity of connections between cells. So you can try something while you test it, right? Oh, Prevagen. Sorry, that was one thing we did test in the lab 2 years ago, and it didn't work. It didn't have any effect on memory. The problem is that we didn't have an elderly population. We did not have a long-term consumption. So I can say that Prevagen does not improve memory when given in an acute dose. I'm not sure if I can say it has long-term effects. So we're ready to say bye-bye. Hopefully everybody has gotten up to date on memories. You now know it's hard work, so you're going to spend time doing it. And if you have any questions, by all means, go ahead and email me, Barber at Dickinson. All right, take care.